Imagine a time of tension and mystery, where Joseph's two young sons are growing up in a distant Egyptian palace. Far from their ancestral homeland, Ephraim and Manasseh, born to an Egyptian mother, seem like ordinary boys. But their destiny is about to change. Their aging blind grandfather Jacob is about to make a bold, unthinkable move that will alter their lives forever. He adopts these young boys as his own sons, completely flipping the natural birthright in one symbolic, dramatic move. Crossing his trembling hands over the boys' heads, he rewrites their destinies and seals a prophetic future. Though it seemed like a simple blessing, this single moment became a turning point that shaped the future of the 12 tribes of Israel. This story reminds us that even in our darkest, most uncertain moments, God still has a plan. What looked like the absolute end for Joseph was actually the dawn of a brand new story of hope and faith. When adversity strikes and every road seems blocked, faith steps in to guide us, turning hardships into blessings and revealing a future only God can orchestrate. Just like Ephraim and Manasseh, our lives can be redefined by grace. But their incredible story actually begins with their father, Joseph. As the 11th son of Jacob, Joseph was always his father's favorite, receiving an obvious and very public level of affection. Jacob made no secret of his blatant favoritism, even gifting Joseph a spectacular custom coat of many vibrant colors. This symbolic gift signaled his high status within the family, but this blatant affection sparked a burning jealousy among his older brothers. Over time, they grew deeply hostile and bitter, but the tension went way beyond favoritism. In his innocence, Joseph shared his vivid dreams with them. In these dreams, everyone bowed down to him. He saw his brothers' sheaves of wheat bow to his own. In another, the sun, moon, and 11 stars bowed down to him. Sharing this only made things worse. His brothers grew even angrier, seeing Joseph not just as the favorite, but as an arrogant sibling, putting himself above them. One day, Jacob sent Joseph to check on his brothers while they were out tending the flocks. Down in Shechem, the brothers saw him coming. Fed up with his presence, they saw a golden opportunity to rid themselves of this threat. They wanted to kill him outright, but Reuben, the oldest, suggested a different plan. "Throw him into an empty pit," he said, secretly planning to rescue him later. The others agreed. They stripped off his coat and threw him in. But when a caravan of Ishmaelite merchants passed by, heading toward Egypt, Judah had an idea that changed everything. Why let Joseph die in a dark hole? What do we gain by killing our brother and covering up his blood? Let us sell him instead, Judah suggested. The brothers agreed and sold Joseph for 20 pieces of silver to the merchants who took him to Egypt. To cover their tracks, they slaughtered a goat, soaked Joseph's fine coat in blood, and brought it to Jacob. They made him believe a wild beast tore his favorite son apart. Grief-stricken, Jacob ripped his clothes in despair. He wept bitterly, refusing comfort, crying out that he would go to his grave mourning his lost boy. Meanwhile, in Egypt, Joseph was sold to Potiphar, a high-ranking officer of Pharaoh and captain of the guard. Even in this strange, hostile land, Scripture tells us the Lord was with Joseph, making him succeed in everything. Seeing his sharp competence and raw integrity, Potiphar promoted Joseph, placing him in charge of his entire estate. From that moment on, Potiphar's household was blessed, as if Joseph's very presence brought down divine favor. Everything he touched thrived. Potiphar did not have to worry about a single thing except the food he ate. He trusted the young Hebrew completely. But then, Joseph's life took a dangerous and dramatic turn. Potiphar's wife grew infatuated with Joseph's handsome looks and youth. She tried to seduce him daily, but he firmly refused. He protected his integrity, not just out of respect for Potiphar, but out of devotion to God. How could he commit such a great sin against God? Humiliated and furious at being rejected, she plotted her revenge. One quiet afternoon, with the house empty, she grabbed him by his cloak and demanded, "Come to bed with me." In a brave display of loyalty, Joseph bolted out of the house, leaving his cloak in her hands. She kept it as false proof to accuse him of assault. Blinded by rage, Potiphar threw Joseph into royal prison. Yet even behind bars, God was there. He showed Joseph favor, and the prison warden quickly noticed his remarkable character and natural leadership. Soon, he put Joseph in charge of all the other prisoners. The warden never had to double-check anything under Joseph's watch, because the Lord was with him. With him, and Joseph prospered in everything he did. During his time in prison, Joseph got the chance to interpret the dreams of two of Pharaoh's officials, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker. Both had dreams that deeply troubled them, and Joseph, guided by divine wisdom, interpreted them perfectly. He predicted the chief cupbearer would soon be restored to his post in 3 days. But the baker, according to Joseph, would be executed within that same time. And what Joseph predicted happened exactly as he said. Before the cupbearer was released, Joseph begged him to remember him before Pharaoh. But the cupbearer forgot, leaving Joseph locked up for 2 more years. His chance at freedom finally came when Pharaoh himself had 2 deeply troubling dreams. In the first, 7 fat, healthy cows rose from the Nile, followed by 7 ugly, skinny cows that ate them up. In the second dream, 7 healthy heads of grain grew on a single stalk, only to be swallowed by 7 thin, withered ones. None of them, wise men or magicians in Egypt, could explain them, leaving Pharaoh desperate. That is when the cupbearer finally remembered Joseph and told Pharaoh about his incredible gift. Instantly, Joseph was summoned from his dark prison cell, shaved and dressed in clean clothes to stand before the ruler. When Pharaoh shared his dreams, Joseph humbly replied that he could not do it, but God would give Pharaoh the peace of mind he needed. Joseph then revealed the dreams were a warning. 7 years of great abundance would be followed by 7 years of severe famine. He advised Pharaoh to appoint a wise leader to manage the resources during the good years, preparing them country for the coming crisis. Blown away by the wisdom of this 30-year-old, Pharaoh asked his court, "Can we find anyone like this man who has the Spirit of God?" Pharaoh then made Joseph his prime minister, giving him authority over all of Egypt. He sealed this promotion with his own signet ring, fine robes, and a gold chain. Joseph was given a new Egyptian name, Zaphanath-Paneah, and paraded before the public in a royal chariot, as heralds shouted for everyone to bow down. Pharaoh declared that though he was the king, no one in Egypt could lift a hand or foot without Joseph's approval. In a single day, a forgotten prisoner became the second most powerful man in Egypt. To make his new authority absolute, Pharaoh arranged a marriage between Joseph and Asenath, daughter of Potiphar, the priest of On. This union was more than personal. It was a massive political alliance that cemented Joseph's high status in Egyptian society. On, also known as Heliopolis, was a major religious center dedicated to Ra, the sun god. As the daughter of an influential priest, Asenath belonged to Egypt's elite. Her marriage to Joseph helped weave him directly into high society, securing his political and social power. But this story is about more than one man's climb to success. It is about a grand divine plan that would ultimately lead to 2 powerful tribes of Israel, represented by Ephraim and Manasseh, whose names would echo through history as symbols of God's providence and the destiny of a nation. Yet Scripture does not give us many details about the marriage of Joseph and Asenath. or how they navigated the cultural and religious differences that surely arose between them. Joseph was a Hebrew, faithful to the true God, following his ancestral traditions, while Asenath grew up immersed in Egyptian pagan worship. Surprisingly, the Bible mentions no conflicts or rocky adjustments in their household, suggesting they found a way to build a harmonious life together. Perhaps Asenath even chose to adopt her husband's faith. This quietness in the biblical narrative suggests their relationship was built on a deep mutual understanding and a genuine respect for each other's personal beliefs. During the 7 years of incredible abundance that Joseph managed with such foresight and wisdom, Asenath gave birth to 2 sons during Egypt's golden era. The biblical text makes it clear that both were born before the famine began, meaning their early years were spent in absolute security and comfort, all guaranteed by their father's brilliant work. Joseph named his firstborn Manasseh, a name connected to the Hebrew word meaning to forget. Joseph explained that God had finally made him forget all his troubles and his entire father's house. Of course, this does not mean Joseph completely forgot his family and origins. Instead, he was emotionally healed from the painful weight of his past. The name became a beautiful symbol of how God transformed his grief and isolation into a life filled with limitless blessings and joy. Joseph named his second son Ephraim, which comes from a Hebrew root meaning to be fruitful, to grow, multiply, and be fruitful. When Joseph explained the name, he said, "God made me fruitful in the land of my suffering." Ephraim represents Joseph's deep gratitude for the abundance and prosperity he experienced in Egypt, despite being a stranger in a distant land, far from his home and his original family. This name reflects the way God blessed him, not just materially, but emotionally and spiritually, allowing him to flourish even in a land of affliction, far from his homeland and the hardships he faced. These 2 names given to the sons of Joseph, Manasseh, and Ephraim were not merely chosen as simple labels, but reflected the incredible journey of transformation that Joseph had gone through. Manasseh symbolized overcoming past hardships, transforming his deep pain into a new hope and joy. Meanwhile, Ephraim expressed the idea of growth and prosperity even after years of suffering and injustice. Together, these names represented the total transformation Joseph experienced. He left behind the pain of loss and slavery and embraced a new life of freedom, authority, and abundance. Although Joseph had been raised in a simple pastoral environment on the hills of Canaan, his sons grew up in a completely different reality. Manasseh and Ephraim were raised in the opulence of Egyptian palaces, enjoying privileges that their father's high status provided them. They were educated as elite Egyptians, learning the various sciences of the era, like hieroglyphic writing, history, geography, math, and administration, while learning the complex social norms and etiquette of the royal court. They grew up speaking Egyptian natively, wearing clothes of the nobility, and socialized with other high society children. In many ways, Manasseh and Ephraim lived a life of luxury and respect, a dramatic contrast to the harsh conditions their father had faced. Though fully immersed in the Egyptian culture, the biblical text suggests that even while living among them, Manasseh and Ephraim still maintained a strong awareness of their Hebrew identity. This suggests that although Joseph was completely integrated into Egyptian society, he made sure to pass down the faith and traditions of his ancestors. It is highly likely Joseph told them stories about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, about the promises made by God, and about the special covenant between God and their family. This dual education Egyptian, in terms of practical knowledge and social skills, and Hebrew in terms of faith and spiritual values, prepared his sons to play a unique role in Israel's history. They were undoubtedly being shaped to live between two worlds, and their upbringing would prove essential for the role they would play in the history of God's people. The lives of Manasseh and Ephraim were far different from what their father Joseph experienced in his youth. While Joseph had a simple childhood, shepherding sheep on the hills of Canaan, his sons lived in palaces surrounded by wealth and honors. While Joseph faced rejection, slavery, and prison, his sons enjoyed the privileges of being the sons of a powerful man in Egypt. This generational contrast was significant when later their grandfather Jacob adopted them as his own, placing them in the place of his own sons, who were older and in many cases held accountable for their mistakes. After the 7 years of abundance, the 7 years of famine finally arrived, as Joseph had predicted. The famine hit not only Egypt, but spread throughout the region, reaching Canaan, where Jacob and his family still lived. While Egypt was well prepared for the crisis, due to Joseph's leadership, other places, including Canaan, suffered deeply. When Jacob learned that food was available in Egypt, he sent 10 of his sons to buy grain. Benjamin, the youngest and only other son of Rachel, was kept safe, as Jacob feared some harm might befall him after already losing Joseph. Jacob, who had suffered so much from losing his beloved son, became extremely protective of Benjamin, the last remaining link to his beloved wife, Rachel. This situation illustrates the depth of family bonds and how the choices Joseph made, his hardships, and his rise in Egypt affected the next generations, culminating in a historic reunion and family restoration. When the brothers of Joseph arrived in Egypt searching for food due to the severe famine, they were led straight to Joseph, who was now the governor of Egypt, overseeing all food distribution. Joseph, now a figure of great authority and influence, recognized his brothers immediately, though they did not recognize him. The young Hebrew, humble shepherd they had sold into slavery 20 years ago, was now dressed in royal robes, speaking the Egyptian tongue and wielding immense power. The contrast between this powerful ruler and the young man he had despised in the past was immense. Instead of revealing himself right away, Joseph decided to put his brothers to the test. Wanting to test if they had changed over the years, he spoke to them through an interpreter, keeping up the illusion that he was an Egyptian, accusing them of being spies. Shocked, the brothers defended themselves and explained that they were sons of one man and had left their youngest brother back in Canaan. But Joseph demanded they bring their youngest brother to prove their honesty, and decided to keep Simeon bound in prison as a guarantee that they would return. Hearing this demand, the brothers were deeply shaken. They immediately connected this nightmare to what they did to Joseph years ago. "We are surely being punished for our brother," they said to each other. "We saw his deep distress when he begged for his life, but we refused to listen." They spoke openly in Hebrew, never imagining that Joseph understood everything. Hearing their words, Joseph turned away and wept, deeply moved by his brothers' raw grief and regret. Before they departed for Canaan, Joseph quietly ordered that the money his brothers had brought to purchase food be secretly slipped right back into their bags of grain. When the brothers discovered this on the road, they panicked, terrified that they would be accused of theft. Back home, they told Jacob everything that had happened, explaining they would have to take Benjamin, their youngest brother, on the next trip. But Jacob flatly refused, crying out, "My son will not go down with you. His brother is dead, and he is all I have left. If disaster strikes him, you will bring my gray hair down to the grave in grief." Jacob clung desperately to Benjamin, his only surviving child of Rachel, fearing he would lose his last link to his beloved wife. But as the famine worsened, the brothers had no choice but to go back to Egypt for more food. It was then that Judah, showing immense responsibility, personally guaranteed Benjamin's safety, promising his father, "I will stand surety for him. I myself will be responsible for his life. If I do not bring him back, I will bear the blame before you forever," Judah promised, reassuring Jacob he would never let any harm come to the boy. Jacob finally relented, letting them go and ordering them to carry gifts to the Egyptian ruler, including balm, honey, choice spices, myrrh, pistachios, and almonds, along with double the money, including the silver that was returned before. When the brothers finally arrived back in Egypt with Benjamin, they were ushered straight to Joseph's private house for a feast, a sudden move that deeply alarmed them. They nervously explained to the steward about the silver found in their sacks, but the steward calmed them, saying, "Peace be with you. Do not fear. Your God, the God of your father, must have put treasure in your sacks." Then Simeon was released and reunited with them. When Joseph arrived, the brothers bowed low to the ground, unaware they were fulfilling the very dreams Joseph had years ago. He asked about their father, and when his eyes fell upon Benjamin, his own brother Joseph was overcome with powerful emotion. He had to rush out of the room to weep in private. When he composed himself, he returned and ordered the feast to begin. To his brothers' absolute shock, they were seated in the exact order of their ages, from oldest to youngest. This left them baffled. How could a foreign ruler know such a detail? Joseph then sent portions to them from his very own table, but Benjamin's serving was 5 times larger than any of them, the others. It was a test to see if they were still eaten up by jealousy. Afterward, Joseph ordered his servants to fill the men's sacks with as much grain as they could carry, and secretly put their silver back again. But this time had his own personal silver cup hidden inside Benjamin's sack. Soon after they departed, Joseph sent his steward to chase them down and accuse them of theft. When the silver cup was discovered in Benjamin's sack, the brothers fell into utter despair and tore their clothes in grief. They rushed back to the city, and when they stood before Joseph once more, Judah stepped forward with a deeply moving speech. He explained that their father had already lost one beloved son, and if Benjamin was lost too, it would send the old man to his grave in sorrow. In a stunning display of love and a completely changed heart, Judah offered to take Benjamin's place as a slave. "Please let your servant remain here as my lord's slave, and let the boy go back with you." His brothers Judah pleaded, showing a profound willingness to sacrifice himself, a massive shift from the cold attitude he had toward Joseph in the past. This incredible act of self-sacrifice and the genuine proof of a truly changed heart finally convinced Joseph. Unable to control his emotions any longer, he demanded that all his Egyptian servants leave the room. Weeping so loudly that the entire palace heard him, he revealed his identity, crying, "I am Joseph. Is my father still alive?" His brothers were stunned, terrified, and utterly confused. But Joseph gently reassured them, "Come close to me. I am Joseph, your brother. I am the brother you sold into Egypt. But do not be distressed or angry with yourselves for selling me here, for it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you." Joseph then explained how the painful events of his life were part of God's divine plan. He spoke of 5 remaining years of famine, inviting his entire family to move to Egypt, where he could support them. "You will live in the region of Goshen, and I will provide for you there." When Pharaoh heard the news, he welcomed them, offering Egypt's best land and sending wagons to transport their women, children, and the elderly. When the brothers returned to Canaan and told Jacob that Joseph was still alive and ruling Egypt, he was stunned and disbelieving. But when he saw the wagons Joseph sent to carry him, Jacob's spirit revived. He cried out, "It is enough! My son Joseph is still alive. I must go and see him before I die." So at 130 years old, Jacob set out for Egypt with his entire family, a total of 70 people. As they reached the region of Goshen, Joseph prepared his chariot to meet his father. Their reunion was deeply emotional. Joseph threw his arms around Jacob's neck, weeping for a long time. Seeing his son alive once more, Jacob declared, "Now let me die, since I have seen your face and know you are still alive." Joseph then presented his 5 brothers to Pharaoh, who confirmed the offer of Goshen and suggested their most skilled men look after the royal livestock. This grand gesture of welcome and providence led to the complete reunification of the family of Jacob in Egypt, where God's plan was fulfilled, ushering in a new era of prosperity and reconciliation. During this crucial season, Jacob had the joy of meeting Joseph's sons Manasseh and Ephraim in person. The biblical text briefly describes this moment. Upon seeing the 2 boys, Jacob asked, "Who are these?" Joseph, with a quiet and meaningful look, replied, "They are the sons God has given me here." This brief encounter between the aging patriarch and his grandsons, born in a foreign land with a completely different culture, was a quiet prelude to an event that, though simple, would become a major milestone for Jacob's family, and later, destiny of the entire nation of Israel. 17 years had passed since Jacob and his family relocated to Egypt. In that time, the patriarch, now 147 years old, watched his family prosper in fertile Goshen, witnessing the growth of his lineage as they multiplied and grew stronger with each generation. But knowing his days were numbered, Jacob felt he had to secure a vital promise before he closed his eyes in death. He begged Joseph not to bury him in Egypt, but to carry his body back to Canaan, to his father's tomb, the sacred land where his ancestors rested. This dying wish was far more than just a personal preference. It deeply reflected his deep bond with the promised land which God had sworn to his family. Soon after, when Joseph was told his father was growing gravely ill, Joseph took his 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, now young adults, to see Jacob, setting the stage for a historic moment. When the aging patriarch heard that his beloved son was coming to see him, he gathered his remaining strength and sat up in bed to welcome him with dignity. During their meeting, Jacob began to remind Joseph of the divine covenant God had made with him at Bethel, where the Almighty had appeared to him saying, "I will make you fruitful and increase your numbers. I will make you a community of nations, and I will give this land to your descendants forever." Jacob then made an astonishing declaration that redefined their entire future. He said, "Now your 2 sons, born to you here in Egypt, Ephraim and Manasseh, will be mine, just as Reuben and Simeon are mine." This move carried immense weight, as it was a formal adoption of his grandsons as his own direct heirs. By doing this, Jacob elevated them to the status of tribal patriarchs, putting them on equal footing with his own 12 sons who founded the 12 tribes of Israel. In practice, this meant Joseph's descendants would receive a double portion of the inheritance, a right normally reserved for Reuben, the firstborn son, who lost his birthright due to a serious sin. Jacob clarified that while Ephraim and Manasseh were now adopted, any future children Joseph had would not receive this unique status, but remain under Joseph's name. reserved for his older brothers. Any children born after them will be yours, called under the name of their brothers in their inheritance. Now old and failing, Jacob's eyes were dim, and he could not see clearly. Noticing the two boys, he asked, "Who are these?" Joseph, with quiet humility, explained that they were the sons God had graciously given him in Egypt. Jacob then asked for them to be brought close, so that he could bless them. This moment, as Jacob blessed his grandsons, is deeply symbolic because echoes what Jacob himself went through years ago when he received the blessing from his father Isaac, whose own eyesight was also failing. But unlike Jacob, who had deceived his father to steal that birthright blessing, Joseph presented his sons honestly, with complete transparency and respect. The formal adoption of Ephraim and Manasseh was not just about family succession. It had profound implications for Israel's future. First, by adopting his grandsons, Jacob gave Joseph a double portion of the inheritance divided between Manasseh and Ephraim, a privilege normally reserved for the firstborn son. Second, this adoption elevated two young men, born and raised in Egypt under Egyptian culture, to the status of tribal patriarchs equal to the other sons of Jacob, born in Canaan. This decision also reflected the deep special love Jacob had for Joseph, the son of his beloved Rachel. Avoiding the open favoritism he showed in the past, and to prevent reigniting jealousy among his other sons, Jacob used this adoption as a way to honor his favorite son, without sparking family conflict. From a theological perspective, the adoption of Ephraim and Manasseh also carried deep spiritual significance. Through this, both young men became heirs of not just a physical inheritance, but of the divine covenant God made with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They were no longer just descendants by blood, but spiritual heirs to God's promise for Jacob's entire lineage. This adoption fully integrated Ephraim and Manasseh into the patriarchal line of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, showing that despite their Egyptian upbringing, their destiny was bound to their grandfather's bloodline. Historically, Jacob's decision had a lasting impact. By adopting them, he created not just one tribe for Joseph, but two separate tribes that would later become central to Israel's history. These tribes would fulfill Jacob's prophecy that Joseph would be a fruitful bough spreading out to future generations. Following the adoption, Jacob prepared to bless his grandsons individually. Following tradition, Joseph positioned his sons before his father, Manasseh, firstborn on Jacob's right for the primary blessing, and Ephraim the younger on the left. But to Joseph's surprise, Jacob crossed his hands, putting his right hand on Ephraim's head and his left on Manasseh's, reversing the traditional blessing. Joseph tried to correct his father's apparent mistake, asking him to place his right hand on Manasseh's head. But Jacob refused, insisting he knew exactly what he was doing. "I know, my son, I." "No," Jacob said. "He too will become a great nation, but his younger brother will be even greater, and his descendants will become a multitude of nations." This deliberate act of reversing the blessing order reflects a common pattern in Scripture, where God chooses the younger brother to fulfill his purpose, overriding human expectations, based on the tradition of the firstborn. This reinforces a key biblical theme, that divine plans often bypass social conventions and established orders. The blessing Jacob gave was rich in theological and historical meaning. He invoked the God before whom walked my fathers Abraham and Isaac, the God who has been my shepherd all my life to this day, while also referencing the angel who delivered me from all harm. This blessing reaffirmed God's ongoing relationship with Jacob's family as well, while formally welcoming Ephraim and Manasseh into the patriarchal line. It also reinforced the divine promise of multiplication made to Abraham, ensuring that the descendants of Ephraim and Manasseh would grow abundantly across the land. This blessing holds several key elements. First, it invokes three aspects of the divine, the God of his fathers, the personal God who shepherded Jacob, and the angel, likely a reference to the angel of the Lord, a physical manifestation of God who protected him. This threefold description emphasizes God's presence across generations. Second, the blessing formally establishes Ephraim and Manasseh's place in the family line. Jacob declared they would carry his name and his father's names. No longer outsiders or secondary figures, they were now full members of the covenant family. Finally, the blessing calls for immense growth, echoing the original promise made to Abraham that his offspring would match the stars in the sky and the sand on the shore. Jacob then added, speaking directly to Joseph, "I am about to die, but God will be with you and return you to the land of your ancestors." This reveals that even after decades in Egypt, Jacob still viewed Canaan as his their family's homeland, anticipating the eventual return of his descendants to that land. The prophecy that Ephraim, though the younger, would become greater than Manasseh was literally fulfilled in Israel's subsequent history. In the first census in the wilderness after the Exodus, Ephraim counted 40,500 men fit for war, while Manasseh had 32,200 initially, confirming the prediction, though a later census saw those proportions temporarily reverse. Throughout history, the tribe of Ephraim indeed assumed a far more prominent role. Ephraim became the leading tribe of the northern kingdom after the monarchy split, so much so that its name was frequently used by prophets as a synonym for the entire kingdom. Great leaders like Joshua and Jeroboam rose from this tribe, and major cities like Shiloh, where the tabernacle was established, and the key religious and political center of Jeb would be located in their territory. The phrase, "a multitude of nations," used in reference to Ephraim, some see this as referring to the international reach of the tribe after its dispersion by the Assyrian Empire, while others interpret it as Ephraim's central role among the tribes of the north. From a broader perspective, some scholars link this phrase to the original promise made to Abraham that through his offspring all nations of the earth would be blessed. The deliberate crossing of Jacob's hands was no mere symbolic gesture. It was a prophetic declaration. Through this act, the patriarch, on his deathbed, declared that God's ways often contradict human expectations based on social conventions like birthright, the younger chosen over the older, the seemingly weak over the strong, the second over the first. This pattern would repeat throughout Scripture, culminating from a Christian perspective in Christ, who though rich became poor, and though existing in the form of God, emptied himself. Joseph protested, but Jacob's firm reply was, "I know, my son, I know," emphasizing that this reversal was no mistake, but a deliberate act guided by prophetic vision. Just as God chose Abraham from among all peoples, Isaac instead of Ishmael, and Jacob instead of Esau, now he was indicating his choice for Ephraim over Manasseh, following divine pattern of choice that transcends human norms. For nearly 4 centuries, the descendants of Jacob remained in Egypt. What began as a family of 70 people grew exponentially, fulfilling the divine promise of multiplication. According to the biblical account, the children of Israel were fruitful and increased greatly, multiplied and became extremely strong. so that the land was filled with them. The descendants of Ephraim and Manasseh in particular flourished during this period, and their communities grew in number and influence, even as the Israelites went from honored guests to oppressed slaves. Egyptian oppression, instead of limiting Hebrew population growth, had the opposite effect. The more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied and grew. Before the Exodus, an intriguing account in 1 Chronicles 7:20-24 describes an unsuccessful attempt by some Ephraimites to return to Canaan prematurely. According to this passage, some descendants of Ephraim were killed by the men of Gath while trying to seize their livestock. Ephraim mourned for many days, and later had another son, Beriah. Though brief and lacking detail, this incident suggests the Ephraimites kept the memory of Canaan alive as their true homeland, even after generations in Egypt. By the time Moses led the Exodus from Egypt, the tribes of Ephraim and Manasseh had grown significantly. The first census, taken in the Sinai wilderness, recorded impressive numbers. The tribe of Ephraim had 40,000 men fit for war age 20 and older, while Manasseh had 32,200. These figures confirmed the prophecy of Jacob. Ephraim the younger had indeed become more numerous than Manasseh the firstborn. During their wilderness journey, both tribes camped on the west side of the tabernacle, next to Benjamin, forming the division of Ephraim under Ephraim's banner. This arrangement reflected the close bond between the tribes descended from Rachel, Joseph, and Benjamin. A milestone during the wilderness years was the selection of Joshua, son of Nun, from the tribe of Ephraim, as Moses' assistant and eventual successor. This Ephraimite leadership would have profound implications for Israel's future. Joshua was one of only 2 adults, along with Caleb, who left Egypt and entered the Promised Land because of his faithfulness during the spy episode. The wilderness wandering period forged the identity of these tribes far from Egyptian influence. There, relearned the traditions of their ancestors and embraced the law received at Sinai. The tribes of Ephraim and, like the others, Manasseh experienced both moments of faithfulness to the covenant and seasons of rebellion and apostasy. From the golden calf incident to constant complaints against Moses toward the end of their 40 years in the wilderness, a second census revealed striking shifts. While Ephraim's tribe shrank to 32,500 men, Manasseh grew significantly to 52,700. This temporary shift did not undo Jacob's long-term prophecy, but reflected the natural population swings during that challenging era. After the death of Moses, Joshua the Ephraimite led the people to conquer Canaan. Under his command, Israel crossed the Jordan River, took Jericho, and gradually claimed the Promised Land. When the time came to divide the land among the tribes of Israel, a unique feature stood out in the territorial distribution. While most of Jacob's sons received a single portion, Joseph's descendants, specifically his 2 sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, each received separate portions. This fulfilled the special blessing of Jacob, who had adopted his grandsons as his own sons, and guaranteed Joseph a double portion of the tribal inheritance, a right normally reserved for the firstborn. This division of the land was decided by lot, but not without considering strategic and geographical factors of great importance to the emerging nation. The territory assigned to the tribe of Ephraim was vast central, with a highly strategic geopolitical location. Their land stretched from the Jordan River in the east to the coastal region in the west, though the coast itself wasn't fully occupied due to fierce resistance from the Canaanites. To the north, Ephraim bordered Manasseh, and to the south, the tribes of Benjamin and Dan. This strategic location gave Ephraim not just fertile territory, but also a crucial hub for trade and defense, protecting the entire nation. Cities of immense historical and religious importance were located right within the territory of Ephraim, like Shiloh, where the tabernacle was set up, and Shechem, a place dating back to Abraham's time, which became a central landmark in Israel's history. Beyond its heritage, Shechem served as the first major worship site in Israel, long before the temple rose in Jerusalem. Meanwhile, the tribe of Manasseh received an inheritance, split in two. Half the tribe settled east of the Jordan on lands already conquered during the time of Moses, while the other half settled west of the Jordan, north of Ephraim. The geography of this split major implications for the internal unity of the tribe. Manasseh's territory, although quite vast, included rugged mountain regions that were harder to farm and develop, especially in the western area. When Joshua distributed the territory's leaders from Ephraim and Manasseh protested, demanding to know why. They received only a single lot, given the sheer size and importance of their clans. Joshua challenged Ephraim, urging them to renew their covenant with God. He called them to commit themselves once more to the Lord, saying, "Choose this day whom you will serve. As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." This powerful covenant renewal was one of the most significant moments in the history of Israel, where all the tribes, including Ephraim and Manasseh, promised to serve God alone. Joshua then set up a massive stone to witness this vow, placing it in the sanctuary of the Lord at Shechem. Yet even after this solemn covenant, the tribes faced massive struggles, especially with driving out the Canaanites. Neither of the two tribes managed to fully drive out the original inhabitants from their territory. Ephraim, for instance, failed to expel the Canaanites of Gezer, who stayed in the region, forced into labor as servants. In the same way, Manasseh failed to clear the Canaanites from their inherited towns. This cohabitation with the Canaanites bred a growing temptation toward false idols over time, which spread rapidly through the tribes and became a recurring struggle. After Joshua's death, Israel entered a chaotic era, the time of the judges, when there was no centralized leadership. Every tribe did whatever seemed right in their own eyes, sparking a vicious cycle of rebellion, harsh foreign oppression, crying out to God, and dramatic rescue through deliverers hand-picked by God. During this time, Ephraim and Manasseh played crucial roles. Deborah, a prophetess and judge of Israel, lived under the palm of Deborah, between Ramah and Bethel, in the hill country of Ephraim. Under her leadership with Commander Barak, Israel crushed the Canaanite army led by Sisera, a massive triumph for the nation. Another prominent judge was Gideon of the tribe of Manasseh, who became a legendary military leader. When the angel of the Lord appeared to Gideon, he was threshing wheat in a winepress to hide it from the Midianites. When called upon, Gideon replied, humbly claiming his tribe was the weakest in Manasseh, and that he himself was the least in his family. Yet despite his initial doubts, Gideon led a miraculous victory against the Midianites, with an army of just 300 men, freeing Israel from 7 years of oppression and securing his leadership nationwide. Yet during the era of judges, tribal tensions rose, and Ephraim in particular had issues with their tribal pride. When Gideon called the clans to battle the Midianites, he initially did not summon the Ephraimites, triggering a bitter clash. After the victory, Ephraim confronted Gideon, asking why they were not, though Gideon later diplomatically and wisely diffused the situation, honoring Ephraim's key role in capturing the Midianite leaders. A far more dangerous clash arose with Jephthah, the judge of Gilead. After his victory over the Ammonites, the proud Ephraimites threatened him violently for not being summoned to the battle. Unlike Gideon, Jephthah met them with force, defeating the angry Ephraimites in the battle. This clash exposed a deep, growing tribal pride among the Ephraimites, which would later have long-lasting implications for Israel's future. Shiloh, located in Ephraim's territory, became the main religious center of Israel, housing the Holy Tabernacle and the Ark of the Covenant. The high priest Eli served there where young Samuel was dedicated to the service of God by his mother Hannah. Shiloh held immense spiritual importance, helping to cement Ephraim's growing power, reflecting its massive influence in both spiritual and political affairs. Yet, end of the Judges era was scarred by tragedy in Shiloh when Philistines captured the Ark of the Covenant after a crushing defeat. Shiloh was destroyed, and the prophet Jeremiah later pointed to this ruin as an example of divine judgment, when God said, "Go now to my place in Shiloh, where I first made my name dwell, and see what I did to it because of the wickedness of my people Israel." Jeremiah 7:12. The transition of Israel to a monarchy had deep implications for Ephraim and Manasseh, who already played vital roles in the nation's political and spiritual structures. Samuel, the final judge and the first great prophet after Moses, was an Ephraimite by birth, son of Elkanah and Hannah from the hill country of Ephraim. At first, Samuel resisted the idea of a human king ruling Israel, warning the people of the dangers of centralized power. But after the people's persistent demands, God instructed Samuel to anoint Saul of the tribe of Benjamin as the first king of Israel, launching the monarchy. The bond between Ephraim and this new kingship was complex and marked by tensions. On one hand, Saul's tribe of Benjamin shared deep historical ties with both Ephraim and Manasseh, all being descendants of Rachel, which should have fostered a natural alliance. On the other hand, the rise of kingship and centralized power stripped away the autonomy Ephraim had enjoyed during the era of Judges, when the clans operated independently. But when Saul failed his mission and was rejected by God, Samuel anointed David of the tribe of Judah as the next king. This power shift from a northern tribe like Benjamin to a southern one like Judah deeply fueled tensions. After Saul died, only Judah recognized David as king immediately, while northern tribes including Ephraim and Manasseh followed Ishbosheth, the son of Saul, for 2 years before finally accepting David's leadership. During the reign of King David, Ephraim and Manasseh still experienced growth and prosperity, but watched Israel's political center shift away to the city of Jerusalem, perched on the border of Judah and Benjamin. When David conducted a census, the populations of Ephraim, Manasseh were massive, confirming their sheer numbers and crucial importance to the kingdom. David placed men from these clans in leadership roles, but the political center of gravity had already shifted permanently southward, reflecting the growing concentration of power. Under King Solomon, the kingdom of Israel reached its zenith of power, wealth, and influence. Solomon built the magnificent temple in Jerusalem, further cementing the religious centralization that began with moving the Ark of the Covenant to the city of David. This centralization, however, eclipsed the spiritual importance of older sanctuaries like those in Shiloh, in Ephraim's territory. During Solomon's reign, seeds of bitter discontent began to sprout among the northern tribes, fueled by his harsh policies of forced labor and high taxes to fund his grand building projects. He set up 12 administrative districts to collect taxes, completely reorganizing the land in ways that often ignored traditional tribal boundaries, and these harsh measures provoked resentment grew especially among the northern tribes of Ephraim and Manasseh. This rising discontent became clear in the story of Jeroboam, an Ephraimite, whom Solomon appointed to oversee the house of Joseph. The prophet Ahijah of Shiloh met Jeroboam and tore his cloak into 12 pieces, giving him 10, symbolizing that God would grant him rule over 10 tribes of Israel. When Solomon found out, he tried to kill Jeroboam, who fled to Egypt, staying there until the king died. The death of Solomon marked a massive turning point for Israel, as his son, Rehoboam, traveled to Shechem in Ephraim to be crowned, a move showing he wanted to win over the influential northern tribes. But when those northern tribes, led by the exiled Jeroboam, returned from Egypt, they confronted Rehoboam, demanding that he lighten the heavy workload and harsh yoke his father had imposed on them, promising loyalty in return. Rehoboam demanded 3 days to think over their request, while the elder advisors urged him to be kind and grant the people their demands. But the younger advisors pushed for a harsh response, choosing their ruthless advice. Rehoboam declared, "My father made your yoke heavy, but I will make it heavier. My father scourged you with whips, but I will punish you with scorpions." This brutal reply tore the kingdom apart. The northern tribes, including Ephraim and Manasseh, rejected Rehoboam and shouted, "What share do we have in David? To your tents, O Israel. Look after your own house, David only." The southern tribes of Judah and Benjamin stayed loyal. Meanwhile, Jeroboam the Ephraimite was crowned king of the northern tribes, fulfilling Ahijah's prophecy. He first set up his capital in Shechem, at the heart of Ephraim, before moving it to Penuel and then Tirzah. But Jeroboam feared that the people's religious pilgrimages to Jerusalem would draw their hearts back to David. So he made a fatal choice that changed history. He set up rival worship centers in Bethel and Dan, erecting golden calves and declaring, "Here are your gods, Israel, who brought you out of Egypt." Though meant to secure his political grip, this move directly violated the second commandment, plunging the northern kingdom into state-sponsored idolatry. Jeroboam also appointed non-Levitical priests and created rival religious festivals to replace those ordained by Moses. Because of this, Scripture would forever remember him as the man who made Israel sin. Through Jeroboam's rebellion, the tribe of Ephraim seized control of the northern kingdom, which prophets would often simply call Ephraim in the dark years ahead. For the next 2 centuries, the northern kingdom of Israel saw seasons of great wealth, mixed with political and spiritual chaos. Meanwhile, southern Judah kept the line of David unbroken, but the north suffered 9 different dynasties and constant bloody assassinations, showing deep political instability. Yet under King Omri and his son Ahab, Israel found temporary stability and economic wealth. Omri built a strategic, heavily fortified new capital called Samaria. Under Ahab, Israel grew into a regional superpower, sending a massive army to fight a coalition against Assyria. This is documented on Matel Dan Stela, where Ahab is recorded providing 2,000 chariots and 10,000 soldiers for the Battle of Karkar in 853 BC. However, this material success came with a steep spiritual decline. Ahab married Jezebel, a Phoenician princess who actively introduced and promoted the worship of Baal across Israel and hunted down the Lord's prophets. In this dark hour, the prophet Elijah emerged, challenging Ahab and the prophets of Baal in a dramatic showdown on Mount Carmel. Later prophets like Amos and Hosea cried out against the northern kingdom, warning against their material wealth and deep moral and spiritual decay. Amos, for instance, attacked how the rich crushed the poor and slammed their religious hypocrisy, saying they sell the righteous for silver and the needy for a pair of sandals. They trample on the heads of the poor like dust, and deny justice to the oppressed, as recorded in Amos. Hosea, on the other hand, used a broken marriage to show Israel's unfaithful relationship with God, exposing their betrayal of the covenant. Most telling is the frequent use by Hosea of the name Ephraim when referring to the northern kingdom, as when he declares Ephraim is joined to idols. Leave him alone. This reflected the tribe's absolute dominance in the politics of the northern kingdom. On the geopolitical stage, Israel faced mounting foreign threats. First, the Aramean kingdom of Damascus was the main danger, but everything changed as the mighty Assyrian Empire began to rise. As a rising superpower in the region, Israel faced mounting pressure, forcing the Israelite kings to act. They tried different strategies to deal with this threat, and their desperate responses varied widely. Some chose military resistance. Others paid heavy tribute or made risky alliances. King Menahem, for instance, became a vassal of Assyria under Tiglath-Pileser III, paying 1,000 talents of silver for protection. But Menahem's successor Pekah chose rebellion. He allied with Damascus to defy the mighty Assyrian Empire. Seeking help from neighboring kingdoms to stand together, they pressured the southern kingdom of Judah to join them. This sparked the Syro-Ephraimite War. Terrified by the growing threat, King Ahaz of Judah refused to join. Instead, he begged Assyria for help. The superpower intervened immediately, crushing the armies of Damascus. They did not stop there, capturing vast parts of Israel. This initial wave of conquests devastated key regions. Galilee and Gilead fell, including the eastern territory of Manasseh, lands that had always been the very heart of Israel. As recorded in 2 Kings 15:29, a devastating process of mass exile began. The northern tribes were deported. Hoshea, the last king of Israel, tried keeping his independence by paying tribute to Assyria. But when he turned to Egypt for help and stopped payments, he triggered Assyria's fury. In response, Shalmaneser V invaded Israel, besieging Samaria. After 3 long years, the capital city fell. This disaster marked the end of the northern kingdom after nearly 200 years of independent existence in 722 BC. With Samaria's fall, Assyria unleashed its ruthless policy of forced mass deportation. The Israelites were dragged off to distant lands, resettled in Halah, near the Gozan River and across. The cities of the Medes, remote regions of northern Mesopotamia and modern Iran, that swallowed up the exiles. The Bible reveals that the Assyrian king did not stop there. He imported foreigners from regions like Babylon, Cutha, Ava, Hamath, and Sepharvaim to live in Samaria, completely replacing the deported Israelites. They took possession of the land and settled in its towns, permanently altering the demographic makeup of the region. This cross-deportation policy, described in 2 Kings 17:24, aimed to crush any sense of national identity and prevent rebellion. By mixing these different peoples, the Assyrians intentionally engineered a completely new environment, diluting the 10 lost tribes of Israel among pagan cultures. These newly settled foreign peoples adopted a blended syncretic religion, combining the worship of the true God with their own pagan traditions. Their descendants, known as the Samaritans, would live in constant tension with the Jewish people for generations, reaching a peak during New Testament times where bitter hostility between them was a daily reality. But what about the fate of the exiled Israelites, including the lost tribes of Ephraim and Manasseh? Their ultimate fate remains a mystery. The famous phrase, "the 10 lost tribes of Israel," highlights how little we know about what happened to these exiles. Down through history, several theories suggest they were completely absorbed by neighboring nations, losing all of their unique Hebrew identity. Others believe that, though scattered, they managed to preserve their ethnic and religious identity, eventually merging with Jewish communities in ancient Mesopotamia, holding on to ancestral traditions. Writing 150 years later during the Babylonian exile, the prophet Ezekiel offered a powerful message of hope through his famous vision of the two sticks. In Ezekiel chapter 37, he prophesied the future reunion of Judah and Israel, declaring, "I will make them one nation on the mountains of Israel. One king will rule them all. They will never again be divided into two separate kingdoms." This divine promise did not just foretell a physical homecoming. It pointed to a deep spiritual renewal. God promised, "I will cleanse them. They will be my people, and I will be their God." Ezekiel's vision soared far beyond the politics of his day, pointing toward a final restoration that scholars believe would find its ultimate fulfillment in a future messianic age. God's promise transcended the political realities of the ancient world, pointing to a glorious restoration that scholars interpret as a messianic prophecy. Later, during the post-exilic period, when the Jewish people returned to rebuild the temple, representatives from across all the tribes of Israel were present, including Judah, Benjamin, and Levi. Surprisingly, even small remnants of northern tribes like Ephraim and Manasseh returned home. Manasseh integrated into the restored Jewish community, though with a quieter presence. This return of the exiles reflects God keeping his promises, proving that even in dark captivity, the seed of Israel persisted and was renewed. By the New Testament era, tribal identity remained alive and relevant. When the prophets recognized the child Jesus in the temple, some were identified with the tribe of Asher. Luke 2:36, a clear example of how tribal identity and Israel's ancient traditions survived even under Roman rule, alive among the people. Over time, various communities around the world began to claim descent from the lost tribes of Israel, like Ethiopia's Beta Israel and the B'nai Manasseh of India. Though many of these claims are hard to historically verify, they reflect the profound cultural impact of the lost tribes narrative, which continues to shape the identity of diverse peoples to this day. The spiritual legacy of Ephraim and Manasseh goes far beyond their fate as political or territorial entities. Jacob's prophecy that Ephraim would become a multitude of nations in Genesis 48:19 is seen by many scholars as foreshadowing the universal reach of the Abrahamic faith, a reach that extends through both Judaism and, from a Christian perspective, the Church. This fullness of the Gentiles mentioned by Paul in Romans 11:25 is clearly seen as fulfilling this promise. In Ephesians, Paul uses language echoing Jacob's adoption of Ephraim and Manasseh to describe the beautiful inclusion of Gentiles into God's family, saying that you are no longer strangers and foreigners, but fellow citizens with the saints and members of God's household. Ephesians 2:19. This grafting of Gentiles into the family of faith reflects the depth of the divine plan reaching far beyond Israel's borders. The story of Ephraim and Manasseh, from their adoption by Jacob to the rise and fall of their power, culminating in their scattering among the nations, carries a profound message about God's absolute sovereignty over history. The fall of Samaria and the northern kingdom's collapse, though they first seemed like final defeats, must be understood prophetically as part of a grander narrative, the divine story of redemption. Jacob's deliberate reversal of the birthright, putting Ephraim the younger ahead of Manasseh the elder, foreshadowed a divine pattern often seen throughout Scripture, choosing the weaker over the strong and the second over the first. This divine pattern would culminate in the coming of the Messiah, who appeared not as a political conqueror, but as a suffering servant, completely flipping all human expectations. The story of Ephraim and Manasseh stands as a lasting witness to how God works through human events to fulfill His eternal purposes. Often, God acts in ways that completely transcend our immediate conventional expectations, revealing a divine plan of redemption that reaches far beyond Israel's physical and political borders. The apparent historical collapse of the northern tribes mysteriously wove into a larger plan of redemption embracing all the nations on earth. Far from being a hopeless tragedy, the scattering of Israel's tribes became a crucial part of the salvation story spanning generations. Even today, the lessons of this narrative still resonate with believers. The story of Ephraim and Manasseh teaches us that material wealth without spiritual faithfulness is unsustainable in the long run. The decline of the northern kingdom, despite its vast wealth, military power, influence, proves that true success cannot be measured by worldly and superficial standards. The reversed blessing of Ephraim over Manasseh the younger over the older also teaches us about the nature of divine election, which constantly defies human expectations. God often chooses the weak to shame the strong. In His infinite wisdom, He fulfills His purposes in ways that bypass human standards. This theme echoes through Scripture. Isaac over Ishmael, Jacob over Esau, David over his older brothers. God's choice is never based on human merit, but on His sovereignty to fulfill His will. The final destiny of Ephraim and Manasseh, scattered among the nations, can also be seen as the paradoxical fulfillment of the promise to Abraham that through his descendants, all families of the earth would be blessed. Although the tribes' dispersion resulted from their unfaithfulness, it served to carry elements of the monotheistic faith to distant lands, possibly preparing the ground for a broader understanding of God's plan among the nations. Ephraim's historical legacy is touchingly recognized in the Bible. God speaks through the prophet Jeremiah, declaring that Ephraim is His dear son, a child in whom He delights. Though I often spoke against him, I still remember him. Therefore my heart yearns for him. Jeremiah 31, verse 20. This passage reveals God's fatherly heart, showing that despite Ephraim's rebellion, His deep love remains unconditional. He proves His faithfulness even in the darkest times. In the future Messianic era, according to Isaiah's prophecy, the old divisions dividing the tribes would be healed. Isaiah envisioned a peaceful future where Ephraim's jealousy would vanish and their adversaries would be cut off. Ephraim will not envy Judah, and Judah will not harass Ephraim. The New Testament echoes this unity in Hebrews 11, verse 21, where Paul honors Jacob's act of faith in blessing Joseph's sons Ephraim and Manasseh, highlighting the importance of this narrative in Israel's great journey of faith. Looking at the full story of Ephraim and Manasseh from their adoption by Jacob to the peak of their power and then their exile, we see a familiar pattern in the Scriptures: rise, fall, and final redemption. This cycle reflects not only the historical path of Israel, but also the journey of all humanity, showing our deep need for salvation, which is only found in God's divine plan, where the Messiah is the ultimate fulfillment. So the tribes that started as two boys born in ancient Egypt, born to a former Hebrew slave and an Egyptian priestess, blessed by their dying grandfather, became the heart of a powerful kingdom, only to be scattered across the world. Yet their incredible stories still inspire us, showing how God fulfills His purposes and remains forever loyal to His promises, even when we fail to keep His commandments. If this powerful story touched you and gave you new insights into God's ways, please share this video with your family and friends so they can also be blessed by this message. Every Bible story is packed with divine wisdom just waiting to be discovered. Together we can grow in understanding and enrich our faith. If you haven't subscribed to our channel, make sure to subscribe now and turn on notifications. That way, you'll stay updated on our next videos featuring more inspiring Bible stories and deep teachings to impact your life in a profound way. Remember, just as God used Joseph's struggles to bring blessings to many nations, He can also turn your challenges into doorways to a much greater purpose. As Joseph wisely told his brothers, "You planned evil against me, but God used it for good." May this truth echo in your heart, giving you confidence that even in tough times, God has a plan for your good. See you in the next video with more inspiring, uplifting Bible stories. May God continue blessing your life abundantly, along with all of your precious loved ones.